small gift, but are grateful that you're here. One thing that you need to know about Center Church is we are a newer church. We've been here in Charlottesville for about 5 years, coming up on our 5th birthday this January. And so our staff team is a lean, mean fighting machine. Now, we've got 4 full-time staff running this operation, seeking to serve the Lord and make disciples here. And so we all wear a lot of different hats, a handful of different hats. And maybe my favorite hat to wear is getting to work with the college ministry quite a bit. Can I get a shout out to Center College over here? Yep, okay, great. So every time I get up here, I gotta give a quick shout out to them. If you're not 18 to 22, please forgive me for this. But I just wanna take a moment to point you college students to our upcoming Blue Mountain Weekend. All right, Blue Mountain Weekend is coming up just a couple of weekends. It's our annual fall retreat. And if you are a college student that's gonna call Center Church home, it is the place to be on that weekend. No home football game, no test the next week. I already cleared it with your professors. Come and join us. It's going to be a great time. There's a early bird sign-up rate that runs out tonight, so save yourself $10 or 2 cookout trays, however way you want to cut it. That's what it'll be. But go ahead and sign up. We'd love to have you. It's in Lynchburg. We'll have rides all taken care of. But go to centercville.com/BMW. Join us for that, and we would love for you to join us at that Blue Mountain Weekend upcoming. All right. Well, everybody else, you can come back in and join me. As a church, as you know, we have been walking through Joseph's life over the past couple of weeks. We've got a few weeks to go. These are chapters from the end of Genesis. And what we've been seeing as we look at the life of Joseph, you can turn to Genesis 40 now, that's where we're gonna be today. But what we've been seeing as we look at Joseph's life, as we look at this passage of Genesis, is that God's providence just jumps off the page. Right? God's providence is so clear throughout Joseph's life, how God is working all the events of Joseph's life for God's purposes. Sometimes Joseph gets to see it. Other times he doesn't get to see it. But as we look back on this story through the book of Genesis, we see how God is weaving a story and a narrative throughout Joseph's life. God's hand, God's providence is at work through Joseph. God is purposefully directing all things in his life and in ours as well toward his purposes. And if you're a follower of Jesus here this morning, that is really good news. It is good news that God is in control of all the events of your life because of the cross. All right, the cross of Jesus Christ tells us once and for all that the one who controls the events of our lives is also a God who cares for his people enough to send his son to die on the cross for us. So it's good news. The doctrine of providence is really good news for those of us who are followers of Jesus. And what we've been praying as a staff team, as a pastoral team for this sermon series is that our church would walk away trusting this, that the doctrine of God's providence leads us to be humble in good times and hopeful in hard times. Or the doctrine of God's providence, when we understand that God is orchestrating the events of our lives for his purposes, it leads us to a deep humility when we have good times, right? It says that I didn't choose the family that I was born in, the opportunities that I have, the work ethic that was developed, but it is all a gift of God's grace. So as I succeed or as I face times of plenty and blessing, it is a gift from God. So I walk in humility, gratitude, and thankfulness, right? The doctrine of providence points us to humility in good times, but it also points us to be hopeful in hard times. Because again, the God who hung the stars in the sky is the same God who hung on the cross for you. So no matter what you're walking through, you can trust that God has a plan. And today, Genesis chapter 40 is gonna show us specifically how the doctrine of God's providence applies into our seasons of waiting. All right, seasons of waiting. Joseph in this chapter, in a lot of points in his life, is in a season of waiting. He's in and out, back and forth, waiting for the next thing to come in difficult moments. And so we're gonna see how God's providence relates to our seasons of waiting. Let me catch you up on the story if you haven't been here. There are some incredibly high highs and some incredibly low lows in Joseph's story. So I'll just walk us up to this point so far. So Joseph, he grew up as the favorite son of a regional landowner named Jacob, who Jacob was also the chosen leader of God's people in his generation. Like, that's a high. You got an awesome dad. But because of this favoritism, his brothers sold him into slavery to get rid of him. All right, that is a low. As a slave in Egypt, he rose through the ranks to a leadership position in a government official's estate because God was with him, right? Another high. But then he was falsely accused of rape by his boss's wife and was thrown in prison, a low. While unjustly kept in prison, again, because God was with him, he rose through the ranks and became an imprisoned prison warden over the prisoners. And I guess we'll count that as a high. And that's where we find this verse. Joseph is in prison. He's risen through the ranks, but he's definitely not free. And Genesis 40 verse 1 starts like this. Sometime after this, Joseph is sitting in prison for some time. Joseph is just waiting. And the worst part of waiting is that he does not know how long it will be or if he will ever get out. From our perspective, we know the end of the story. He's gonna rise to the peaks of power throughout the Egyptian empire. He's gonna have tons of wealth and success, but right now, he has no idea about that future. He is just sitting in prison for some time. And here this morning, I know there are many of you who have been waiting for some time in a season of waiting as well. All cards on the table, I do not like waiting. I'm not a fan of waiting. I don't wait well. I'm pretty impatient and I want what I want when I want it and can I keep moving forward. On top of that, my kids don't wait well either. So when you put us into a situation where I've got to wait and my kids have to wait, it does not go well. Just a few weeks ago, we were at a CarMax trying to, figure out what options were out there, balling on a budget, trying to find something that'll get the family around, all that good stuff. And they wrote out in our car to take it on a test drive because they don't even look at it. They just drive it around the block and tell you how much they'll give for you. It's nothing. They don't give you anything for it. But they took it out, so we're waiting in here in the CarMax lobby for the person to come back. And I'm telling you, 2 minutes later, you would have thought the Daytona 500 had broken out with the laps. My son is running around. I'm chasing them down. Hey, wait, but they're coming back. There's begging for candy in the vending machine, and it just got wild really, really fast. They were losing their mind, and I was not doing much better. Waiting is really hard. Waiting is difficult. It's why we pull out our phones at the stoplight. It's why we pay extra for 2 days shipping. It's why we get frustrated by a line at the grocery store. But often, waiting is a lot more serious than those silly temporary things, right? Whether it's a season of loneliness, medical trouble, or career turmoil, waiting can get really hard, really fast. And as we look at the life of Joseph, what we're gonna see in this chapter of his life is that he understood the key to waiting well. In the midst of a season where he had every reason to gripe and to complain and to be frustrated and to fight his way out, Joseph waits in prison with incredible poise and faith and steadfastness, and even as we'll see, uses it as an opportunity to serve others. And I think the reason he was able to do this is not because he was built different than us. It's not because he's a better person. He's a sinner just like us. But I think Joseph, by faith, understood how God's providence related to his waiting. You see, he understood that while he was waiting, God was working. And if we understand that principle today, I think it's gonna help us in our waiting as well. You can write that down. That's the main takeaway for today. While you are waiting, God is working. All right, while you are waiting, God is working. So if you are in a season of waiting today, if you find yourself in a difficult season of waiting, when you don't know the end will come, you can take heart. You can trust the Lord because you can be confident that as you are waiting, the Lord is working. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna walk through Genesis chapter 40. We're gonna take a look and get our head around this story, and then we're gonna pull out a couple of lessons about waiting well as we trust the Lord. All right, so this is Genesis 40, chapter 1. We'll walk through the story together. Sometime after this, the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and his baker committed an offense against their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was angry with his 2 officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. And he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard appointed Joseph to be with them, and he attended them, that they continued for some time in his custody. That phrase there, he attended them, you can just underline that. We'll come back to that later, but attended is the same word that's translated served from the Hebrew. In the midst of his waiting, Joseph didn't get consumed with himself, but was looking to serve others. All right, so the story. We've got a cupbearer and a baker thrown in prison with Joseph, and these two are not like the typical, restaurant workers today. If you've seen The Bear, you know what I'm talking about. That's not what these people were. You can think more like CIA Secret Service agents, right? They are closest to Pharaoh. They tasted what he tasted. They sipped what he sipped, and they were in charge of making sure that there was no attempt against his life. We don't know exactly what happened to get them thrown in prison. They committed an offense. Most people think Pharaoh's just tossing them in prison until they have time to figure out what happened and how they're going to respond to the situation. So they're in prison, and they just happened, right? Just happened to be tossed in prison under Joseph's charge, right? The first note of God's providential hand in this chapter. Verse 5, and one night they both dreamed, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, each his own dream, and each dream with its own interpretation. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were troubled. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in custody in his master's house, "Why are your faces downcast today?" And they said to him, "We have had dreams, but there's no one to interpret them." And Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me." Another spot to underline. He saw that they were troubled. In the midst of his waiting, when it would make sense to turn his eyes inward, he was aware of what other people were walking through. We'll come back to that. In the ancient Near East, dreams meant a lot. They meant a lot. The culture saw dreams as a way that the gods would speak to people. And dreams have always fascinated humans. We've wanted to learn a lot about them. Even today, dreams can really mess with us. Has anyone ever woken up one morning upset with their spouse because of a dream that they had? Right? Their dreams are powerful things. They mess with us. And the Bible records a lot of dreams, right? This wasn't just a cultural fascination, but God was speaking through his servant through these people's dreams and its interpretation. And there's today, even still, God speaks at times to his people through dreams. One of our missionaries in Central Asia that we partner with just sent me an update a couple weeks ago about how she met someone, a believer there, and there's very few where she is, who had become a Christian. And part of her story, what kicked off her searching journey for a Savior, was a dream that she had of a Savior who loved her. When God is giving people, large groups of people throughout redemptive history, new revelation, he often accompanies this with dreams, right? That's why the start of the Old Testament and the start of the New Testament have clusters of dreams, of God speaking through dreams. In Genesis, there's 10 dreams, and then the Gospels and Acts have the most, also have a lot of dreams compared to other places in the Bible. You see, dreams are a special, not a normative way that God speaks to his people, but it does seem that when he's doing a new work in a new place, drawing people to himself in Central Asia, starting God's covenant family in Genesis, or telling the world that Jesus Christ is the Messiah who has come and establishing that truth, God has authenticated or worked his power through dreams at times. So here's the principle for this passage and for us today. God spoke to them then through this dream, but God speaks to us today through his word. All right, then God spoke to them through the dream, but God speaks to us through his word today. And just like the Bible, just like God's word, their dreams needed to be interpreted and applied. So that's what Joseph does in verse 9. So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, "In my dream there was a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand." Then Joseph said to him, "This is its interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand as formerly when you were his cupbearer." All right, Joseph hears the dream. Like I said before, God's word, God's revelation, and he interprets it for him. So what's going on in this story is Joseph has relationships with people who are walking through a difficult time, and Joseph is a vessel of God to take God's word and interpret and apply it to them, right? Joseph is around people who do not know God, and he speaks God's word to them. He applies God's word to their lives. And as a church, we want to apply the truth of God's word and bring hope to people's lives as well. Here's the principle that we take away from this passage. People are most open to God's word in seasons of trouble or transition. All right, people are most open to hearing and engaging with the truth of God's word when they are in seasons of trouble or transition. These men in prison were unsure of their future. They didn't know if they were gonna make it out or not. They were in a season of waiting as well. So they came to Joseph and they asked for help. We are most open to God's word in seasons of trouble and transition. Think of the thief on the cross who gave himself to Christ at his lowest moment. Or think of the dozens of people throughout the Gospels whose moral failure or physical needs drove them to go to Jesus and to hear the good word of the gospel that Jesus proclaimed. in your story. I would bet that if you are a follower of Jesus, you probably repented and believed in Jesus, decided to follow him, not from a season of moral success, what need is there for a savior at that point, or of everything going great, but a season of weakness and failure and need. That certainly is my story. That may be why some of you are here today. You've been trying to figure out life. You either had a moral failure and are wondering, how did I become the kind of person who would break a relationship and make a decision like this? Or your life is falling apart and you can't hold it all together. In seasons of trouble and transition, our eyes are opened up more to the truth that is always true, that we can't hold it all together and we're not enough on our own. In seasons of trouble and transition, it's an opportunity to proclaim the word of God to others. But if we're being honest, being like Joseph here is pretty tough. Right? Speaking God's word to another person, especially if they don't know God or are not indicating interest in hearing God's word, can be pretty intimidating, right? Can I get an amen to that? Yeah, sharing the gospel with somebody, it's a lot. So I just want to encourage you with one way you can start to lay a foundation to at least cultivate some opportunities to be able to speak God's word into the lives of others. And it's simply this: you can seek to be explicitly Christian and highly relational. All right, seek to live highly relationally and explicitly Christian. Why does that help? Well, first, highly relational. So God loves people, and so we should love people. To love people well, we need to know people, and so to get to know people, we can live highly relationally, right? For some of you, you're extroverts, and you know the name of every Starbucks barista in like a 20-mile radius, right? That's great. Use that for the kingdom of God, highly relational. Others of you, I say this, and you're like, I can't be a Christian. I can't live highly relational. That's terrifying. I'm sneaking out the back. I don't want to meet new people. I don't want to talk to them. That is okay. Your personality type does not depend on, your faithfulness does not depend on your personality type. But what you have the opportunity to do is step outside of the camp. Get to know someone new, to love them because God loves them, to open up a door for sharing the gospel with them. Again, we want to know people because God knows them. And if we're going to speak the word to them, we've got to know them first. So the first thing you can do is just pray for opportunities to know a couple more people. Take a step of faithfulness to know somebody that you could share Christ with them. So that's the first, is live highly relationally. The second aspect of this, though, is to live explicitly Christian. All right, explicitly Christian. If you are a follower of Jesus, being a Christian is core to your identity. So you don't need to hide it, right? We all sang the song, hide it under a bushel? No, I'm gonna let it shine, right? We are called to live explicitly Christian. You don't have to be crazy, awkward, and uncomfortable about it, wearing shirts and just yelling about it all the time, though you may, and praise God if that's you. But when that conversation comes up, take an opportunity to identify with Jesus publicly. If you're taking your trash out to the curb and your neighbor says, how was your weekend? I hope you can honestly say that you were encouraged by the sermon today, and they will know that you're a follower of Jesus, right? If you have relationships with people, and hopefully you're living, bearing good fruit of the gospel in your life, and then people around you know that the reason for that is that you're a follower of Jesus, the hope is that doors will open and opportunities will arise for you to interpret and apply God's word into their life when they face seasons of trouble and transition. I had a friend a few years ago that I played basketball with, and unfortunately, it's like a few years ago at this point. It hasn't been as much recently getting to play basketball. But I had a friend, we would play basketball a lot together, and he was not a believer. We would talk about faith every once in a while. I'd ask him to grab coffee, to sit down and read the Bible together. He wasn't super interested, but I let him know I was praying for him every once in a while. Again, nothing weird, just kind of encouraging him, pointing him to Jesus in little moments that I had the opportunity to. He was never really interested. But so after a while, he moved across the country. And about a year later, we'd kind of fallen out of touch, didn't really connect anymore. I got a text from him out of the blue. He said, hey, Justin, I've got a job interview today. I've missed out on the last few that I was sure I was going to get. Would you mind praying for me? Would you pray for me that this job interview would go well and I get it? As far as I know, he hasn't become a follower of Jesus, but it's just a picture that paints it's a story that paints the picture of living highly relationally and explicitly Christian that opens doors to care for people when they walk through seasons of trouble and transition. Joseph was ready to go here, to be a vessel to deliver God's word to somebody who found themselves there. And we have the opportunity as followers of Jesus to do that in our time today. And maybe the best way to start is just seeking to live explicitly Christian and highly relationally. So Joseph, he interprets God's word for the cupbearer. He says, you'll be restored. He gave good news to him. So Joseph, realizing he had some favor built up because of this good news, asks for a favor. Verse 14, Joseph says, only remember me when it's well with you. And please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh, and so get me out of this house. For I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should put me into the pit. And here's the principle. If you can get out of a season of waiting, do it, unless it requires that you sin. All right, if you can get out of a season of waiting, it's okay to get out of it unless it requires you to sin. Sometimes, especially new Christians or new believers or younger Christians, or people particularly full of zeal, can tend to be a little masochistic, right? The scriptures teach very clearly that the way of Christ is a way of suffering, of putting others' interests above our own, and of walking through difficulty. But just an encouragement to you, you don't have to go looking for it. All right, if the Lord graciously provides you a way out of a season of waiting, you can take it. You can walk in it. You don't just have to sit in it for the sake of sitting in it. You can advocate for yourself respectfully and kindly like Joseph does here. So the cupbearer, he got a good report. Joseph asked for help once he was back in office, but it does not go as well for the baker. All right, verse 16. When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, he said to Joseph, I want some of that too. I also had a dream. There were 3 cake baskets on my head, and in the uppermost basket, there were all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head. And Joseph answered and said, this is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh from you. You gotta love the flair for the dramatic there. He's just really wanting to push home his point. Remember here, Joseph is simply the messenger, right? He is hearing God's word. He's interpreting it faithfully. He has no control over God's plan, over God's providence. He's the mailman, not the author. So for the cupbearer, Joseph delivered God's word of good news of what would play out. And for the baker, Joseph brought a message of hard news. And that's a truth about God's word. God's word has for us both encouragement and confrontation. All right, all throughout the scriptures, we see both kinds of words, encouragement and confrontation. And a question for you this morning is, do you receive both of those words from the scriptures? Are you willing in humility to receive both encouragement when the scriptures present encouragement and confrontation when the scriptures present confrontation? I've talked to people in our church who just can't seem to receive a word of encouragement from the scriptures, right? They hear about the gospel of Jesus, that our sin has been forgiven. He went to the cross for us and we have life through him. We're forgiven, we're free, we're new, but they still wallow in shame and in guilt, not seeming to be able to apply the forgiveness to their own heart. But if that's you, you can believe it today. There is no sin so great that God's love is not greater still. And if I can push a bit on you, if that's you, it is not humility to think so highly of your sin and so discouraged of yourself, right? God's word says that at the cross, Jesus did everything necessary for your forgiveness of sin and acceptance into his family. So if you doubt that that can be applied to you, it's not extra dose of humility, but it's actually pride. God said that Jesus' grace is sufficient for you in every way. Believe it, rest in it, and enjoy it, and receive a word of encouragement from the scriptures rather than walking in discouragement. Receive it. But others I talk to feel as loved as they could by God, all right, as loved as they could, but do not want to hear a word of confrontation, right? This is our culture today. We love to talk about love and good feelings and something that's gonna build up and make us feel happy inside, maybe give us a little bit of the liver shivers, but we bristle when God's word speaks confrontation, right? They see what the Bible says about money and sex and gender or the existence of truth in general, and instead of conforming to the Bible's hard teaching on difficult topics in our culture, they conform the Bible to fit their preferences. All right, we need to walk by faith to receive words both of encouragement and confrontation from God's word. And that's what we want to be as a church. We just want to be faithful to teach God's word. We want to be faithful like Joseph here. We're the messengers, not the authors. And that's why we open up God's word each week and walk story by story through it. That's why we try our very best to make the main idea that the text is intending to match the main idea of the message that we are teaching. That's why our preaching ministry has both words of encouragement and of confrontation. The Bible is a book, a message from God, both of grace and hope and joy. It's good news. But the good news only makes sense when we understand deeply the reality and the impact of the bad news of sin. A Bible church, a Jesus church, a fruitful, God-honoring church will talk consistently about both the encouraging words in Scripture and the confronting words in Scripture. All right, the cupbearer has good news. The baker has hard news. Let's see how the story plays out. Verse 20. On the third day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he made a feast for all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hands. But he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. God's word never fails. When he speaks, it is as good as done. So it's no surprise that this is how the story ends. The cupbearer is restored, the baker is executed. And Joseph, he did his part. He was faithful to proclaim God's word and interpret the dreams and give it to the people. But for him, it ends with disappointment. The cupbearer did not remember him, but forgot him. This story began with Joseph waiting for some time, and it ends with another season of waiting. He has no idea when he'll get out, if ever. He's stuck in waiting. He was so close. His hopes were dashed. And I know many of us can relate to that this morning. Many of us this morning are stuck in seasons of waiting. Right? Waiting is just longing for the future to be present. It's longing for this season you're in to end and the next one to start. And some of you are waiting for really hard things. You're waiting to see if the treatment works and it takes, and if you'll have a number of years left with your loved ones or just a few months. Right? Others of you are waiting for marriage. Your single friends are all linking up, getting married, starting to have kids, and you do not have a romantic option anywhere on the horizon. You're waiting. You might be here and be waiting for a prayer to be answered. You've been praying a prayer for a long time with a really specific purpose that seems to be honoring to God on every front, and you're just not seeing anything move. Right? You're in a hard season of waiting. You may be waiting for a prodigal child to come home. You did your best to raise them in the church. For sure, you made some mistakes, but now they're off to college or living far away, married to a non-Christian, and you're waiting for them to come back to Jesus. Whatever you're waiting for, waiting is hard. As I mentioned earlier, one of the incredible things that we see in Joseph's life is the way that he walks through this season of waiting with poise. We don't have a record of complaints, and the Bible definitely could have added it. Just look a few chapters before, a few chapters after. There are plenty horrible pictures of main characters in the Bible. But Joseph is presented as somebody who walks by faith, who trusts the Lord because he knows that while he is waiting, God is working. In Genesis 40, Joseph does not know the rest of the story. He does not know what is going to happen, but in faith, he trusts and he's faithful in the midst of it. And if we look to Genesis 41, you just flip a page over, maybe just move your finger over. The first verse actually points us to what God is doing in the midst of Joseph's waiting that he didn't see. First verse says this: after 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed. All right, after 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed. While Joseph was waiting, God was with him. God remembered him. God was working. While he was sitting in prison, it may have looked like he was forgotten, but he had not been forgotten. God had Joseph in a season of waiting for a purpose, to interpret Pharaoh's dream and begin his rise to save his family and all of Egypt from this massive famine that was coming. This season was integral to a larger plan to accomplish God's purposes in the world, but Joseph could not see it from beforehand. Around the corner from Joseph's waiting was God's plan, and the same is true for you. While you are waiting, God is working. We've got to know that and believe that if we're going to wait well in the seasons of waiting that the Lord puts us through in his providence. But on top of knowing that principle, there's also some different lessons that we learn from this chapter that point us to how we can wait well in the midst of seasons of waiting. So what I want to do is walk through 4 of these lessons that we learned from the way that Joseph waited to help us to wait well as well. So first one is this, all right, how to wait well. First, we need to walk with God. All right, during our waiting, if we're going to wait well, we need to walk with God. But in seasons of waiting, that's the last thing we want to do, right? Rather than walking with God and being faithful to him and just waiting on the Lord to come and do something, what do we start doing? We start scheming. We start trying to figure our way out of the situation rather than trusting the Lord and walking with him. Instead of walking with God, we scheme, right? Put yourself in Joseph's shoes. You're unjustly put in prison. You were sold into slavery by your brothers. The last thing that you may do, if you're like me, is have poise and love for others and try to serve others in the midst of that situation. But you'd be raging against God, frustrated, ready to get out, and disappointed with how your life was turning out. But Joseph, he doesn't scheme. He doesn't take down Potiphar and Potiphar's wife or his brothers. And people scheme all over the Bible when they're in seasons of waiting. But maybe the clearest example is one of Joseph's great-grandfathers, Abraham. All right, Abraham had a promise from God. You may remember this if you were here a couple years ago as we walked through Abraham's story in Genesis as a church. But Abraham had a promise from God that he was going to receive a child, he and his wife Sarah, and they were going to, through that child, have descendants that outnumbered the stars in the heavens. You remember the promise that God gave them? So Abraham, the father of faith, praised all throughout the scriptures as a great example of faith. What does he do? As an old man, unable to have kids, his wife, unable to have kids, he trusts the Lord. He serves him faithfully. He waits on the Lord. No, you know the story. He got his wife's servant, slept with her, got her pregnant because he didn't trust the Lord would provide a kid for him, right? Did he trust the Lord and walk with the Lord in a season of waiting? No, he schemed and he sought to get his own way out of it. That's what we're tempted to do. But we see in Abraham's story, the consequences of that decision led to generational damage and brokenness in his family. We are going to be tempted to scheme to get our way out of waiting. And maybe the clearest way I see this in our church today is with the 20-somethings who are eager to be married. But the temptation is strong to, rather than waiting on the Lord and trusting him with it, the temptation is to scheme, right? We have the Bible standards. We have our standards of what we're looking for in a spouse, but it's been a while. And again, it doesn't seem like there's many romantic options on the horizon. So rather than trusting the Lord, I'm going to change the standards that God has for me to take this into my own hands and scheme to get out. But just like Abraham's story, if you scheme to get out rather than walk in faithfulness, it's going to lead to brokenness in your life. And if you're in a season of waiting and you want help to continue walking with the Lord in the midst of it, Psalm chapter 1 is a great place to turn. All right, Psalm 1 is an amazing picture of a promise from God of the blessing that comes when we walk not according to the counsel of the world, but we walk meditating on the law of God, delighting in him and knowing him more. It says the blessed person who meditates on God's law and walks with him in seasons of waiting is like a tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither. In all that he does, he prospers. Psalm 1 makes a promise to God's people that if you wait on him and you walk with him rather than scheming and going your own way, it makes a promise that you will be blessed, that you will flourish in your season. The season might not be now, and that's hard and that's difficult, but by faith, trust that the season will come. Rather than scheming and inviting brokenness into your life, trust the Lord and walk with him. Abide in the word. Have some good, believing friends around you to encourage you in your walk, and wait well by trusting the Lord and walking with him rather than scheming. And here's the truth about seasons of waiting. Scheming might make you feel good for the moment, but it will bring brokenness later. While walking with God might be hard in the moment, it will bring blessing for a lifetime. All right, so that's the first thing we see in Joseph's life. Rather than scheming, rather than putting others down, rather than getting up by putting Potiphar down, he trusts the Lord. And that's the first thing it looks like to wait well. All right, next, assume ministry responsibility. All right, while you're waiting, if you're gonna wait well, assume ministry responsibility, right? In this story, I pointed out a couple of times that Joseph, rather than turning inward in seasons of waiting, started to assume ministry responsibility. But the people that were put into his care, it says he served them. And then on top of that, when they were downcast, they were sad, he noticed and he pulled it out of them. He said, hey, what's going on? Why is your face downcast today? He's looking for opportunities to serve in the midst of his season of waiting. But in seasons of waiting, we have the tendency to turn inward, don't we? Rather than pursuing ministry responsibilities. And for sure, if you're in the midst of a hard season, there's a place to get your feet under you, to get some stability, to figure stuff out. But if we never get our eyes off of our situation and onto what the Lord has for us and the good of other people, we're gonna get captured and captivated and just get into a death spiral about how hard and miserable our lives are. There's a freedom and a joy that comes as we put our lives on the interest of others and seek to see what the Lord has for us. So here's the principle for you. While you are waiting, unique ministry opportunities will present themselves. All right, in seasons of waiting, unique ministry opportunities are going to present themselves. And I'm not saying you're in a season of waiting and there's unconnected, random ministry opportunities that you can jump into, though I hope you do those things. I think in this story, we see that by the Spirit of God, there is a direct connection between the reason and the season of waiting that Joseph is in to the ministry doors that are opened up. And the season of waiting that you are in, you'll have opportunities that pop up as you get your eyes off yourself and your circumstances and onto others in the glory of God to step into a special ministry that Jesus has for you because of the season of waiting that you're in. Like Joseph, we shouldn't waste our waiting, but should assume ministry opportunities. Sam James was a missionary in Vietnam from the early 1960s to the fall of Saigon in 1975 during the Vietnam War. But before he was a missionary, he had a season of waiting. He and his wife had a few young kids, and they were eager and excited to move overseas to take the gospel to Vietnam. They had a passionate calling and earnest desire to share the gospel with the Vietnamese people. But one of their children had some health complications, and so they had to delay for a season before they could move overseas. Now, if you're a missionary preparing to move overseas, I think everyone is going to give you the benefit of the doubt. It's like, hey, get sleep, rest up, get healthy. You're about to go serve the Lord in a really hard place for the rest of your life. That wasn't the attitude that Sam James had with his attitude or his season of waiting. In this season, he decided to start a new church. So in 1961, he started a new church called Homestead Heights Baptist Church. He ended up, after the season of getting ready, having some other leaders with him, he preached one sermon before he and his family were approved to move overseas and the health needs were taken care of. So he preached one sermon, he hands that church off to other leaders and goes overseas to serve in Vietnam for a couple of decades. And this church, Homestead Heights Baptist Church, in 2001, relaunched as the Summit Church. And if that church sounds familiar to you, that's because that's the church where I came to Christ, where my wife came to Christ. And it's also the church that raised up the core team to launch Center Church 5 years ago. In a very real way, we are all here in this room impacted by the ministry of this church because a young man, Sam James, did not waste his waiting. So the question for us is, what are we doing with the seasons of waiting that God has us in? Right? You don't need to wait to get out of waiting to play a part of what God is doing in the world. In Joseph's story, there was a specific ministry because of his waiting that he had to carry out. And in your story, in your season of waiting, there is ministry, meaningful ministry to care for others and to glorify God in your season of waiting. So what ministry opportunities are available to you precisely because of your waiting? Right? Maybe you're waiting for grandkids or waiting for your grandkids to be closer. Don't waste your waiting. Our church is full of young families and you can invest your wisdom and time into them. Their grandparents live far away and your grandkids live far away. It's a perfect match. Don't waste your waiting, but serve. And I'm so thankful that many of you do that. I believe in your season of waiting. The Spirit has opened up specific doors related to the season of waiting. You might need to have a conversation with your spouse or with a friend before you leave. How can I serve? Who can I serve? Because of the season of waiting that I'm in. So to wait well, like Joseph, we need to walk with God, assume ministry responsibility, and next we need to instill God's lessons, all right? Instill God's lessons. In the midst of waiting, God is always working in you, all right? Joseph, he started out as a young, naive punk that was telling his brothers and his parents they're gonna bow down to him one day, right? He's gotta work through maybe some delivery there. But he's gonna end up being the leader of a nation that's the biggest nation in the world, and he leads them through a massive famine that could have led to horrible devastation if he was not prepared for it. So this season of waiting was an opportunity for God to develop in Joseph character, to instill lessons in him. James chapter 1 says this, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds," all right? Count it joy when you face trials of various kinds. Seasons of waiting count in various kinds of trials. Will you give me that? So why would we count it joy? For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. God's providence will bring into your life seasons of difficult waiting because he wants to instill lessons and character into your life. It's not bad news, but it's a reason to count it as joy. I have a good friend who loves smoking meat. And it's so good. He does a great job. He gets a great cut of meat. He puts it in the marinade for a couple of days. He'll wake up at 6 a.m., get the smoker going, throw the meat on there. He'll give it, 12 hours, 6 p.m. rolls around, and you get an incredible piece of meat coming off the grill to eat. It's incredibly cooked, exactly how it's meant to be. Now imagine for a moment if I tried to replicate this with all of my skills of grilling, and I got that same cut of meat, I got the same marinade in the fridge for a couple of days, and then I pulled it out, popped it on a microwave-safe dish, and threw it in the microwave for 5 minutes and 30 seconds on high. How is that turning out? Not well. I don't even know if you'd be able to chew it at that point. Here's the reality. No matter how much we wish to go about it another way, you cannot expedite spiritual formation. All right, no matter how much we wish to go about it another way, you cannot expedite spiritual formation. Here's the recipe that you must have in order to grow in godly character over time. These are the 4 ingredients: God's word, God's spirit, God's people, and God's providence. All right, God's word gives you truth to rely on and tells you the reality of the world we live in. God's spirit gives you the power that you need to change and grow in your character. God's people give you encouragement and support along the way. And God's providence provides seasons of waiting for these lessons to be instilled deeply. Your discipleship is a smoker, not a microwave, heat over time, filled with the Spirit, surrounded by God's people. So in your season of waiting, ask the Lord, what are you instilling in me? I want to know. I want to count it all joy because you are cultivating character in me that I cannot get any other way. To wait well, instill God's lessons. Joseph's story ends on a really sad note, right? It ends on a really sad note. He has been waiting in prison for a long time. He sees a way out, and then his way out, he gets forgotten. His hopes are dashed. He's waiting for some time again, unsure of whether he'll get out of the season of waiting. In hard seasons of waiting, it is so easy to feel forgotten. So maybe the most important lesson that we learn from Joseph's life, if we're gonna wait well, is we need to trust that we're not forgotten. We need to trust that we're not forgotten. Joseph was forgotten by the cupbearer. The cupbearer completely forgot about him. It was not kind or thoughtful. The cupbearer just put him out of his mind, even though Joseph gave him this interpretation. But though Joseph was forgotten by the cupbearer, God remembered him. While Joseph was waiting, God was with him and God was working. Joseph couldn't see it at the time, but everything that he was going through was absolutely necessary for what God was gonna have him do in the future, right? Without this time to interpret these dreams, he wouldn't interpret Pharaoh's dreams in the next chapter. Without the prison, there would be no palace. Without the cupbearer and the baker, Joseph would not be at the right place at the right time to eventually save God's people, save Egypt, and in a very real sense, save the world from this devastating famine. But Joseph was not forgotten. God was present. God's providence was at work in Joseph's season of waiting, and God's providence even brought Joseph's season of waiting around. In your waiting, it's probably easy to feel like God has forgotten you, but he hasn't. He hasn't. Even if you can't see God's hand, we see in Joseph's story that God has not forgotten his people. While you are waiting, God is working. Romans 8:28 tells us this: we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. As we look back on Joseph's life with the lens of Scripture, we see so clearly how God was working and how his waiting would be worth it. When you get to the end of your life, when you're in eternity with the Father looking back on your time, you'll see that as well. But for now, we trust by faith that God never forgets his people and he's working in our waiting. You're not forgotten. And when you wonder if you are forgotten, there's no better place to look than the cross of Jesus Christ. All right, Jesus, in love for you, to bring you into the family of God, went to the cross to provide forgiveness of your sins. If there was ever going to be a time, there's ever going to be a time that God would forget you, it would have been before the cross. But in love, Jesus went to the cross for you, to pay the penalty for your sin so that you could be brought into the family of God. And so Jesus could make the promise to his people that he made just after the resurrection when he said, I will be with you always, even to the end of the age. And the Spirit will be poured out into our hearts because of the gospel. So in the midst of your waiting, in the midst of your season of waiting, walk with God, assume ministry responsibility, instill God's lessons, and most of all, remember in Christ you're not forgotten. While you are waiting, God is working. I want to invite you to bow your heads as we just go through a time of prayer and reflection on our seasons of waiting and God's goodness to us in the midst of it. There's a psalm, Psalm 130, that's titled, My Soul Waits for the Lord. I want to read this over you as you pray and reflect on your season of waiting. I want to encourage you to trust God with the waiting that you're in. Psalm 130. Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord. O Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to the voice of my pleas for mercy. If you, O Lord, should mark iniquities, O Lord, who could stand? But with you there is forgiveness, that you may be feared. I wait for the Lord. My soul waits, and in his word I hope. My soul waits for the Lord more than watchmen for the morning, more than watchmen for the morning. O Israel, hope in the Lord. For with the Lord there is steadfast love, and with him is plentiful redemption. And he will redeem Israel from all his iniquities. Pray, trust the Lord with your season of waiting. And in a moment, the band will lead us to respond in worship.